Hello, welcome to Dreamlike. I'm Andrew. Tonight, as you drift toward the edge of sleep, I'll be here with you. There's no rush here, nothing you need to do. You don't have to hold on to every word. You can simply listen or let the words flow past you like pages turning in a quiet room. Now, bring your attention to where your body rests. Allow the weight of it to settle downward. Feel how the surface beneath you carries you effortlessly, without any effort on your part. Turn your attention to your breath. Breathe in slowly through your nose, and as you breathe out, allow your body to soften just a little more. You're not listening to this story to stay awake. If sleep finds you, that's exactly as it should be. When your mind begins to rest, the story has done its work. Tonight, I'm taking you to an ancient mountain, a place where moonlight pools like liquid silver on stone, where shepherds once tended their flocks beneath endless stars, where the boundary between mortal and divine grew thin as gossamer. A place where gods walked unseen among humans, where a choice was made that would echo through 3,000 years, and where love learned the difference between possession and presence. This is the Eternal Sleep of Endymion, not just a story of gods and mortals, but a story of what it means to truly let go, to truly love, and to choose life even when sleep seems easier. When you're ready, you can gently close your eyes, and as the silence of the mountains settles around you, with the whisper of ancient winds and the gentle glow of moonlight, you can let yourself drift slowly, comfortably into sleep. That night, silence fell over Mount Latmos, but no one knew why. The shepherds had gone quiet. The sheep stood still in their pens, heads lowered as if listening to something beyond human hearing. Even a wind that usually swept through the olive groves had paused, holding its breath. High above, the moon hung full and radiant, casting silver light across the rocky slopes. But something was different that night. Something ancient was stirring. In a cave halfway up the mountain, a young shepherd named Endymion lay sleeping. His breathing was slow and steady, his face peaceful in the moonlight that streamed through the cave's opening. He did not know that gods were watching him. He did not know that his life was about to change forever. The story of what happened that night would be whispered for thousands of years. But to understand it, one must first understand the gods who walked unseen among mortals, the powers that shaped dreams and darkness, and the price of beauty so perfect it could stop even immortal hearts. Imagine if you had been there on that mountain, watching from the shadows as the moon rose higher. Would you have seen what was coming? Would you have warned the sleeping shepherd? Or would you too have been caught in the spell that was about to unfold? The air itself seemed to hold a quality of waiting that night, as if the mountain recognized that something momentous was approaching. In the villages at the base of Latmos, mothers tucked their children into bed earlier than usual, feeling an inexplicable urge to seek shelter and safety. Old men sitting in taverns found their conversations trailing off, their attention drawn to windows where moonlight pooled like liquid silver on dusty floors. Something was in the air, not threatening exactly, but powerful, ancient, demanding respect. The olive trees that covered the lower slopes stood motionless, their leaves refusing to rustle, even when the occasional breath of wind attempted to stir them. Wild animals, Foxes and rabbits, owls and nightingales, had gone still and silent, as if holding their breath. Even the insects had ceased their usual chorus, creating a silence so profound it felt almost sacred, like the hush that falls over a temple when prayers are about to begin. High in her silver chariot, pulled by two magnificent white horses whose manes seemed woven from moonbeams themselves, Selene felt the tension building in her immortal chest. Tonight would be different. Tonight would change everything. She had known it from the moment she awakened in her chambers in the sky, had felt it in the way her horses stamped restlessly, sensing their mistress's unusual emotional state. They were creatures of habit, these horses, accustomed to the same route night after night for eons. But tonight they seemed to know that routine would be broken. 4 months now, mortal months, brief flickers in her eternal existence. She had been planning this moment. She had visited Hypnos in his twilight cave. She had made her request, explained her situation, confessed her love for a mortal she had only observed from a distance. And the god of sleep, in his quiet wisdom, had agreed to help her, though not without warnings about the consequences of what she was asking. He had looked at her with those deep, fathomless eyes and asked if she truly understood what she was doing. She had said yes, but did she truly? Could any immortal really understand the weight of decisions that involve mortal lives? But there was no turning back now. The decision had been made. Tonight, Endymion would be given a choice that would determine not just his fate, but hers as well. Tonight, a mortal shepherd and an immortal Titanus would both learn the true cost of love that crosses the boundary between earth and heaven. Endymion had not always lived alone on the mountain. Once, he had been the son of Zeus himself, blessed with a beauty that mortals whispered about in every village from Elis to Olympia. His hair was dark as midnight, his eyes held the deep brown of fertile earth, and his face seemed carved by divine hands. When he walked through the marketplace, conversation stopped. When he smiled, people claimed the sun grew warmer. But Endymion had grown weary of attention. He had grown tired of the stares, the gifts left at his door, the young women who invented reasons to speak with him. He wanted simplicity. He wanted peace. So he had taken his flock of sheep and climbed Mount Latmos, finding a cave where he could live alone beneath the stars. His days followed a gentle rhythm. He woke with the dawn, led his sheep to graze on the mountain's sweet grass, and spent his afternoons beneath ancient olive trees, thinking thoughts that only solitude allows. At night, he would lie at the mouth of his cave, watching the constellations wheel overhead, feeling connected to something vast and eternal. He did not know that someone had been watching him for months. He did not know that divine eyes followed his every movement, that an immortal heart beat faster each time he appeared on the mountainside. But the gods always know more than mortals suspect, and on Mount Olympus, whispers had begun to spread about the shepherd who had stolen the attention of the moon herself. Selene was her name, the Titaness who drove the silver chariot of the moon across the night sky. Each evening, she would harness her white horses and begin her journey from east to west, casting her gentle light upon the sleeping world below. For eons, she had performed this duty without complaint, without longing for anything beyond her celestial task, until she saw Endymion. It had been an ordinary night, or so she thought. She had just begun her nightly journey when her gaze fell upon Mount Latmos. There, in a small clearing, a young man sat alone, his face turned upward toward her light. Even from her great height, she could see his beauty. Even across the vast distance between heaven and earth, something passed between them in that moment. Celine felt her hands tighten on the reins. Her horses sensed her distraction and slowed their pace. She found herself guiding them lower, closer to the mountain, desperate for a better view. The young man had lain down now, his arms folded behind his head, his eyes still fixed on the sky. On her. Did he know she was watching? Could he sense her presence the way she felt drawn to his? Night after night, she returned. She found herself planning her route so it would pass directly over Mount Latmos. She began to slow her chariot there, letting the night linger longer in that one place. The other gods noticed. Of course they noticed. When a Titaness forgets her duties for the sake of a mortal, even the stars begin to gossip. You are in love, her sister Eos, goddess of the dawn, said one morning as they crossed paths. The sun was rising, and the moon was setting, the daily handoff between night and day. Celine did not deny it. I have never felt this way before, she confessed. When I see him, time itself seems to pause. My duties feel like chains. All I want is to descend to that mountain and speak with him, touch him, know him. Eos smiled sadly. But you cannot. A Titaness cannot simply abandon her post. And even if you could, he is mortal. His life is a brief flicker compared to your eternity. You would love him, and then you would watch him age and die, and your heart would break in ways we immortals are not meant to experience. Celine knew her sister spoke the truth, but knowledge of pain does not prevent it. Love does not listen to reason, even among gods. There might be a way, Eos said softly, but it would require help from one whose power even we must respect. Who? Celine asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Hypnos, Eos whispered, the god of sleep. Hypnos dwelt in a place mortals could never reach. His home was a cave at the edge of the underworld, where the river Lethe flowed with its waters of forgetfulness. No sunlight reached there. No sound disturbed the perfect silence. It was a realm of eternal twilight, where the boundary between sleep and death grew thin and indistinct. He was not a fearsome god, though he was powerful beyond measure. He appeared as a young man with dark wings and eyes that seemed to contain infinite depth. Gentle poppies grew wherever he walked, their seeds the source of sleep's sweet escape. He was the twin brother of Thanatos, death himself, yet where his brother was cold and final, Hypnos was warm and welcoming. To fall into his embrace was to find peace, to surrender to rest, to let go of all worry and pain. Every mortal who had ever closed their eyes in sleep had felt his touch. Every dream that drifted through sleeping minds was his gift. He was present in every cradle where babies slept, in every sickbed where the suffering found temporary relief, in every lover's bed where exhausted bodies finally stilled. But Hypnos rarely left his cave. He had no need to. Sleep came to all mortals naturally, drawn by his mere existence. Only when the gods required his particular services would he emerge, spreading his wings and flying up from the underworld to touch the waking world. On this night, he received an unexpected visitor. Celine descended from her chariot, leaving her horses to graze on the strange flowers that grew at the underworld's edge. She walked through the cave's entrance, her silver light pushing back the shadows. The air smelled of poppies and something else, something like the quiet moments just before dawn, when the world holds its breath between dreaming and waking. "Hypnos," she called softly, "I have come to ask for your help." From the deeper darkness, he emerged, his wings folded behind him, and his dark eyes studied her with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been something deeper, something that suggested he already knew why she had come. "Celine," he said, his voice like wind through leaves, like distant lullabies. "The tidiness of the moon stands before me. This is unexpected, but somehow not surprising. You have the look of someone who has discovered love." She felt transparent before him, as if her emotions were written in light only he could read. "I do love," she admitted, "a mortal shepherd on Mount Latmos. His name is Endymion, and he is the most beautiful soul I have ever encountered. And you wish for me to grant him eternal sleep," Hypnos said. It was not a question. Celine felt her heart clench. "Is it so obvious? Am I so predictable?" "You are not the first immortal to love a mortal," Hypnos replied gently, "and you will not be the last. But you must understand what you are asking. Eternal sleep is not the same as a mortal life. He will not wake. He will not speak with you or know your presence. He will be frozen in the moment I touch him, unchanging and unreachable for all of time. But he will not age," Celine said urgently. "He will not grow old and die. He will not be taken from me by time or disease or accident. I can visit him every night, see his face, be near him. Is that not better than losing him entirely?" Hypnos was silent for a long moment. The cave around them seemed to breathe, and somewhere in the distance, the river Lethe murmured its eternal song of forgetting. "There is another way," Hypnos finally said. "I could give him a choice. A choice. I could grant him 50 years of waking life with you, meeting you each night when you descend from your chariot. You would have time together, real time, where he knows you and you know him. But at the end of those 50 years, he would die as all mortals do. Or," Hypnos paused, "he could choose eternal sleep now, and you would have him forever, but only as a beautiful statue, a memory frozen in time." Celine felt tears gathering in her immortal eyes. "Why must you offer me this impossible decision?" "Because," Hypnos said softly, "love should be a choice, not a spell. If you make this decision alone, it is merely power. If he chooses, it becomes sacred." The goddess of the moon stood in the darkness, feeling more mortal in that moment than she had in millennia of existence. Finally, she spoke. "Then let him choose. Visit him in his dreams tonight. Show him what each path holds. Let him decide his own fate." Hypnos nodded slowly. "As you wish. But know this, Celine. Whatever he chooses, you will have to live with it for eternity. Choose to prepare your heart." That night, as Endymion lay sleeping in his cave, his dreams took on a quality they had never held before. Usually, his dreams were simple things. Memories of a sheep, images of the mountainside, sometimes the faces of people he had known in his past. But tonight, his dream had weight and substance, as if he had stepped into another world entirely. He found himself standing in a garden he did not recognize. Flowers bloomed in colors he had no names for. The sky above held both stars and sunlight somehow existing together. and before him stood a figure whose beauty made his breath catch in his throat. She appeared as a woman dressed in robes of silver light. Her hair was long and dark, flowing around her shoulders like water. Her eyes held the depth of a night sky, filled with constellations he had studied for years from his mountain home. When she moved, it was with a grace that suggested she had never known the weight of mortal flesh. "Endymion," she said, and her voice was like moonlight made audible. "I am Selene. You have captured my heart, though you did not mean to. I watch you each night from my chariot in the sky. I have fallen in love with you." In a logic of dreams, this did not seem strange to him. He felt as if he had always known her, as if some part of him had been calling to her even as she called to him. "I have felt you watching," he said. "When I look at the moon, I sense something looking back. I thought I was imagining it. You were not," she said, stepping closer. "But our love faces an impossible barrier. I am immortal, and you are not. If we do nothing, you will age and die, and I will be left alone with my grief for the rest of eternity." Endymion felt his heart ache at the thought. Even in this dream, he understood the tragedy of such a love. "Then what can we do?" From the shadows of the garden, another figure emerged. This one had dark wings and eyes that seemed to see into the depths of the soul. "I am Hypnos," he said, "the god of sleep, and I have come to offer you a choice." The air around them seemed to thicken, to become heavy with importance. Endymion listened as Hypnos explained the two paths before him. He could live 50 years with Selene, meeting her each night, knowing the joy and pain of mortal love with an immortal being, and then die as all mortals must. Or he could accept eternal sleep now, preserving his youth and beauty forever, giving Selene the gift of his unchanging presence for all of time, but never truly being with her, never speaking or touching or truly knowing her. "If I choose sleep," Endymion asked slowly, "will I dream?" Hypnos tilted his head, considering. "Perhaps. My sleep is not like death. It is deeper than normal rest, but not as final as the underworld. You might dream. You might experience some dim awareness of her presence when she visits. Or you might float in darkness, consciousness scattered like starlight, neither awake nor truly gone. And if I choose the 50 years, you will have everything mortals have and more," Hypnos said. "Love, conversation, touch, shared experiences. But you will also have pain, the pain of knowing it will end, the pain of watching her struggle with your mortality, the pain that all love carries within it. And at the end, you will die, and she will grieve." Endymion turned to Selene. In the strange light of this dream garden, her face showed every emotion: hope, fear, love, and sorrow all mixed together. "What do you want me to choose?" he asked her. "I want you to choose what your heart desires," she said, though he could hear the tremor in her voice. "I will not make this decision for you. Your life is your own, Endymion. It has always been your own." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on him. When he opened them again, he looked at Hypnos. "How long do I have to decide?" "When you wake in the morning," Hypnos replied, "speak your choice aloud. I will hear it, no matter where I am. But know this, once chosen, it cannot be undone." The dream began to fade then, dissolving like morning mist. Endymion felt himself being pulled back toward waking, back toward his cave and his mortal body. The last thing he saw was Celine's face, her eyes filled with tears that shone like captured starlight. He woke to birdsong. Dawn light was filtering through the cave's entrance, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. For a moment, Endymion lay still, trying to hold onto the details of his dream. Had it been real? Had he truly spoken with gods? Or had his lonely mind conjured a fantasy to fill the empty spaces of his solitary life? But the dream had felt different from any he had experienced before. It had weight, substance, truth. He rose and walked to the cave's entrance, looking out over the mountain. His sheep were stirring in their pen below. The world looked exactly as it always did, beautiful, peaceful, ordinary. Yet everything had changed. If he chose the 50 years, he would have half a century with Celine. He tried to imagine it, meeting her each night, learning to know her, building something real between mortal and immortal. They would have conversations that lasted until dawn. They would share thoughts and feelings, and all the small moments that make love more than just attraction. He would have a partner, a companion, someone who chose him not for his beauty, but for himself. But it would end. In 50 years, he would be an old man, weathered and worn. Would she still love him then? Would he want her to see him diminished, his strength faded, his beauty gone? And when death finally came, as it must, she would be left alone. Immortal gods did not forget. She would carry that grief forever. But if he chose eternal sleep, he would be preserved exactly as he was now. Celine could visit him whenever she wished. She would never have to watch him suffer or decline. His face would never change, never grow old or hard with experience. In a way, he would be perfect for her. A beautiful dream that never had to confront reality's harsh edges. But he would never truly be with her. He would never know her laughter or her tears. He would never hold a real conversation or share a true moment. He would be, in essence, a beautiful statue for her to admire, but not a partner, not truly. Endymion stood at the cave's mouth for a long time, feeling the morning sun warm his face. He thought about his life before the mountain, the attention, the superficial admiration, the way people had loved his appearance but never bothered to know his heart. He had fled to solitude to escape that emptiness. And now the moon herself offered him a choice: to be truly known for 50 years, or to be forever admired but never understood. When the sun had fully risen, Endymion took a deep breath and spoke aloud. His voice carried across the mountain, reaching ears both mortal and divine. I choose eternal sleep. Somewhere in his cave at the edge of the underworld, Hypnos heard those words. He felt their weight, their finality, their sacrifice. The god of sleep rose from his resting place, spread his dark wings, and began his journey to Mount Latmos. High above in her silver chariot, Celine heard the words too. She had not yet completed her nightly journey, had not yet surrendered the sky to her sister's dawn. When Endymion spoke his choice, she felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, precisely, for divine hearts do not break the way mortal ones do, but something close. Something that would ache for eternity. He had chosen to give himself to her forever. He had chosen to sacrifice everything. His life, his future, his very consciousness, so that she would never have to suffer his loss. She wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to demand why he had made such a choice. But she already knew. He had chosen this because he understood what 50 years would do to her. He had chosen sleep because he loved her enough to become a dream. But was this truly love, or was it merely another form of worship? Had he chosen sleep not for her, but because it was easier than the messy reality of living? These questions would haunt her for millennia to come. But there was no time for them now. Hypnos was already descending toward the mountain. Endymion had returned to his cave after speaking his choice. He did not know exactly when the transformation would come, but he felt it approaching the way one feels a storm building on the horizon. He lay down on his simple bed of wool and straw, positioning himself comfortably, and waited. The air in the cave grew heavy and sweet. The scent of poppies filled his nostrils, though no poppies grew on Mount Latmos. Shadows deepened in the corners despite the sunlight outside. And then Hypnos was there, standing at the foot of his bed, his dark wings folded, his expression unreadable. "You have made your choice," the god said softly. "There is no shame in changing your mind. The mortal heart is allowed to be uncertain." Endymion shook his head. "I will not change my mind. This is what I want. If I cannot give her my life, then I will give her my eternal rest. She deserves something that will not leave her." "But you will leave her," Hypnos said gently. "You will be present in body, but absent in all the ways that matter. She will speak to you, and you will not answer. She will touch you, and you will not respond. She will need you, and you will sleep on, unknowing and unreachable. Are you truly at peace with this?" Endymion was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I have thought about it. I understand what I am choosing, and I believe this is the kindest option. She is immortal, Hypnos. She has eternity stretching before her. If I gave her 50 years and then died, she would mourn me for eons. This way, she will always have me. She will never have to say goodbye." The god of sleep studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly he nodded. "Very well. Close your eyes, Endymion. Let your breathing slow. Feel your body growing heavy and relaxed. This will not hurt. You will simply slip from waking into sleeping, and then into a sleep deeper than any mortal has known." Endymion did as instructed. He closed his eyes and felt his body settling into the bed. His breathing slowed, deepened. His mind began to drift, thoughts scattering like leaves on water. He felt warm, safe, comfortable. Sleep was coming for him, and he welcomed it like an old friend. Hypnos leaned forward and placed his hand on Endymion's forehead. His touch was cool and gentle, like a breeze on a summer evening. "Sleep now," he whispered. "Sleep and dream of moonlight. Sleep and know that you are loved." The last thing Endymion felt was a sense of profound peace washing over him. And then there was nothing but darkness, soft and welcoming, pulling him down into depths beyond measure. His breathing continued, slow and steady. His heart kept beating, pumping blood through veins that would never age. His body remained exactly as it was in that moment. Young, strong, beautiful. But his consciousness had gone somewhere far away, somewhere even gods could not easily reach. Hypnos stood over the sleeping shepherd for a long moment. Then he spread his wings and departed, leaving behind only the lingering scent of poppies and the sound of breathing in an otherwise silent cave. That night, when Selene drove her chariot over Mount Latmos, she saw the cave glowing with a soft, silvery light. She knew immediately what it meant. The transformation was complete. Endymion was sleeping. She could not abandon her duties entirely, but she guided her horses as close as she dared, letting the chariot hover near the mountainside. From there, she could see into the cave. She could see him lying on his simple bed, his chest rising and falling with breath, his face peaceful and serene. He looked exactly as he had the first time she saw him, exactly as beautiful, exactly as perfect. Time had stopped for him. He would never grow old, never change, never leave her. But he would also never wake. Celine felt tears streaming down her face, liquid silver that fell like shooting stars toward the earth below. She wanted to descend, to enter the cave, to lie beside him and whisper all the things she had planned to say during their 50 years together. But she could not. Not yet. Her duties called her westward. The night was not yet over. "I will come back," she whispered toward the cave. "Every night I will come back. I will tell you about the world. I will share everything I see. You will never be alone, my love. Never." Whether he heard her, whether some part of him was still aware enough to understand, she could not know. But she made the promise anyway, and she meant it with every fiber of her immortal being. Months passed. The seasons turned. Summer gave way to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring. The world changed, but in the cave on Mount Latmos, everything remained the same. Celine kept her promise. Every night, when her chariot passed over the mountain, she would descend. She would enter the cave and sit beside Endymion's sleeping form. She would talk to him, telling him about the things she had seen on her journey across the sky. The ships sailing on moonlit seas, the lovers meeting in secret gardens, the children sleeping safely in their beds, the wolves howling to her light. She told him about the other gods and their dramas. She described Zeus's latest affair, Hera's latest rage, Athena's wisdom, and Ares' foolishness. She shared the gossip of Olympus, the petty squabbles and grand alliances, the way immortals filled their endless time with intrigue and passion. She told him about mortal lives too. She had begun to pay attention to the humans below in a way she never had before. She watched a young couple marry in a village at the mountain's base. She observed an old woman tending her garden with patient care. She saw children playing in streams, farmers harvesting wheat, travelers resting by roadside shrines. All of it she described to Endymion, as if she could give him the world through her words. Sometimes she would touch him. She would stroke his hair, trace the lines of his face, hold his hand in hers. His skin was always warm, always vital. He did not have the cold stillness of death. He was truly sleeping, trapped in hypnosis' eternal embrace. "Can you hear me?" she would whisper. "Are you dreaming? Do you know I am here?" He never answered. His breathing remained steady, his expression peaceful. If he dreamed, they were dreams he could not share. The other gods noticed her nightly visits. Some mocked her for loving a mortal who could never love her back. Others pitied her, seeing her devotion as a kind of madness. But Celine did not care what they thought. Let them laugh or pity or judge. She had what she wanted, Endymion, eternal and unchanging, forever hers. But late at night, when she was alone with him in the cave, she sometimes wondered if he had made the right choice. Wouldn't 50 years of conversation have been better than an eternity of silence? Wouldn't the pain of his eventual death have been worth the joy of truly knowing him? She would never know. The choice had been made. and even gods could not unmake the past. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. The world changed in ways both subtle and profound. Empires rose and fell. Languages evolved and disappeared. New gods emerged while old ones faded into myth. The worship of the Greek deities declined as new religions spread across the lands. But through it all, Selene continued her nightly journey, and she continued her vigil in the cave on Mount Latmos. She watched as the village at the mountain's base grew into a town, then a city, then crumbled back into ruins. She saw wars fought on the plains below. She witnessed plagues and famines, celebrations and sorrows. Generations of mortals were born, lived, and died, their lives flickering past like mayflies, while Endymion slept on, unchanged. Sometimes other immortals would visit her in the cave, drawn by curiosity or concern. Eos came once, near the end of the 1st century. She stood in the cave's entrance, looking at her sister sitting beside the sleeping shepherd. "You cannot continue this forever," she said gently. "It is not healthy, even for an immortal. You are neglecting your other duties, losing yourself in this obsession." "It is not obsession," Selene replied without looking away from Endymion's face. "It is love." "Is it?" Eos challenged. "Or is it something else? He cannot speak to you. He cannot know you. He cannot choose you anew each day, the way real love requires. You are in love with an idea, sister, with a beautiful statue that breathes." Selene finally turned to look at her sister. "You do not understand. When I am with him, I feel peace. The world outside is chaos and change and loss. But here, nothing changes. Here, I have something eternal. But it is a false eternity," Eos said sadly. "It is stagnation, not immortality. Love should grow and evolve. This is frozen, dead, even if he still breathes." After Eos left, Selene sat alone in the darkness, her sister's words echoing in her mind. Was this love truly? Or had she trapped both herself and Endymion in something that only resembled love from a distance? She did not have an answer, but she continued her vigil anyway, because what else could she do? The choice had been made. There was no going back. More centuries passed. The cave itself began to change, slowly eroded by time's patient work. Rainwater seeped through cracks in the stone, creating delicate formations of mineral deposits. Moss grew in the dampest corners. Small animals made homes in the crevices, unafraid of the sleeping man who never stirred. Selene maintained the space as best she could, clearing away debris, ensuring nothing disturbed Endymion's rest. But she could not stop time's effects entirely. The world was changing, and even this sacred cave could not remain untouched forever. One night, during what mortals called the Byzantine era, Selene arrived to find another visitor in the cave. It was Hypnos, the god who had granted Endymion his eternal sleep all those centuries ago. He stood looking down at the sleeping shepherd with an expression that might have been regret. When Selene entered, he did not turn. "I've been thinking about what I did," he said quietly, "whether it was mercy or cruelty." "It was what he chose," Selene replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Was it?" Hypnos finally looked at her. "Or did I manipulate him with the choice I offered? I presented it as mercy, sleep or loss, preservation or grief. But there were other options I did not mention. I could have made him immortal. I could have given him divine blood, elevated him to godhood. Other mortals have received such gifts. Why not him? Celine felt something cold settle in her chest. Why did you not offer that? Because, Hypnos said softly, I thought this would be easier for you. I thought that if he became a god, he might change, might become someone you no longer recognized or loved. I thought eternal sleep would preserve not just his body, but the feeling you had for him. I thought I was being kind. And now I wonder if I was simply being selfish. Sleep is my domain, after all. Perhaps I wanted him here, in this liminal space between life and death, as proof of my power. Perhaps I doomed him because it pleased me to do so. They stood in silence for a long moment, both staring at the sleeping shepherd. Finally, Celine spoke. Can you wake him? I could, Hypnos admitted, but consider carefully before you ask. He has been asleep for over 1,000 years. The world he knew is gone. Everyone he loved, every place he called home, every certainty he held, all dust now. To wake him would be to give him an orphan's existence, displaced in time, belonging nowhere. Would that be kinder than leaving him in peace? Celine looked at Endymion's face, still so young, still so peaceful. Could she wake him to a world he would not recognize? Could she explain to him that a millennium had passed while he slept? Would he thank her for waking him, or would he beg to sleep again, unable to bear the weight of so much lost time? I do not know what mercy looks like anymore, she whispered. Hypnos placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Few of us do, even among the gods. We make our choices, and we live with them, and we hope we chose wisely. That is all any of us can do. He left then, spreading his dark wings and disappearing into the night. Celine remained, sitting beside Endymion as she had done for 1,000 years, wondering if love was supposed to feel this much like grief. The centuries continued their relentless march. The Renaissance came and went. The age of exploration, the Industrial Revolution. The world modernized in ways the ancient Greeks could never have imagined. Machines replaced magic in mortal minds. Science explained mysteries that once required gods. And still Celine visited the cave each night. And still Endymion slept. By the 20th century, mortals had begun to forget the old gods entirely. They no longer prayed to Zeus or Athena. They no longer left offerings at roadside shrines. The temples had crumbled to ruins, preserved only as museums and tourist attractions. The gods themselves had faded, their power diminished by lack of worship, their presence in the world growing thin and insubstantial. But Celine endured. As long as the moon rose each night, as long as tides ebbed and flowed, she maintained her existence. She was not powerful as she had once been, but she was still present, still driving her chariot across the sky, still visiting the cave on Mount Latmos. The cave itself had become harder to find. The mountain had changed shape over the millennia. New growth covered old paths. Modern humans built roads and towns in places that had once been wilderness. But Celine always knew the way. She could have found that cave blind, drawn by the thread of memory and love that bound her to the sleeping shepherd within. One night in the late 1900s, she arrived to find the cave opening partially collapsed. A recent earthquake had shaken the region, dislodging ancient stone. For the first time in millennia, Selene felt genuine fear. What if the cave had collapsed entirely? What if Endymion had been crushed, his eternal sleep finally ended by violence? She rushed inside, her heart pounding with mortal-like panic. But the inner chamber remained intact. Endymion lay undisturbed, his chest still rising and falling with patient breath, his face still peaceful in the darkness. Selene collapsed beside him, overwhelmed with relief and grief in equal measure. She had been so afraid of losing him, but what exactly would she have lost? A body? A memory? An excuse to hold onto a past that had long since crumbled to dust? "What are we doing?" she whispered to his sleeping form. "What have we become?" She had thought eternal sleep would preserve their love. But love required more than preservation. It required growth, change, challenge. It required two people choosing each other again and again through good times and bad. What she had with Endymion was not love anymore, if it ever had been. It was a museum display, a relic, a beautiful, tragic mistake. But still she came, night after night, year after year. Because what else could she do? This was her purpose now, the only thing that gave her immortal existence meaning. Without her vigil in the cave, who was she? Just another forgotten deity, fading into obscurity as the world moved on without her. The 21st century arrived. Mortals carried computers in their pockets. They walked on the moon that was her domain, planting flags and taking photographs, treating her sacred realm as just another place to conquer. They studied her cycles and tides with mathematics and physics, removing all mystery and magic. And through it all, Selene visited the cave, speaking to an unhearing ear, loving and unresponsive heart. One night, she brought a question that had been building in her mind for decades. She sat beside Endymion and spoke it aloud, as if he might somehow answer after all these centuries of silence. "If you could wake for just 1 hour," she said, "and I could explain everything that has happened, all the millennia that have passed, would you choose to sleep again? Or would you curse me for granting your wish? Would you blame me for this eternal half-life?" The cave was silent except for his breathing. "I think," she continued slowly, "that you would be angry. I think you made your choice in innocence, not understanding what eternity truly means. You thought you were giving me a gift, preserving yourself for me. But you were so young, Endymion. You had lived perhaps 20 years. How could you understand what forever meant?" She touched his face, her fingers tracing familiar features. "I should have refused. I should have told Hypnos no, let him live a normal life, let him grow old and die as mortals do. I should have been strong enough to let you go. But I was selfish. I wanted you, and I let you give yourself away. And now we are both trapped in this terrible eternal present, neither moving forward nor being allowed to end." For the first time in millennia, Selene allowed herself to truly weep. Not delicate tears of silver light, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire being. She wept for the 50 years they never had. She wept for the conversation they would never share. She wept for a love that had been frozen before it could truly bloom, preserved in amber like an insect, beautiful but dead. She wept until she had no tears left, and then she lay down beside Endymion, her head resting on his chest, listening to his heartbeat that had continued unchanged for 3,000 years. "I am so tired," she whispered. I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of pretending this is love. I am tired of eternity." But eternity did not care about her exhaustion. The night continued its course. The moon had to rise and set. Dawn was coming, and with it, her sister Eos, who would take over the sky. Selene had to continue her journey. She always did. She rose, pressed a kiss to Endymion's forehead, and left the cave. Behind her, the shepherd slept on, dreaming dreams no one would ever know. More years passed. The world continued to spin. Mortals invented new wonders and committed new atrocities. The climate changed. Species went extinct. Cultures evolved. And through it all, the cave on Mount Latmos remained, hidden and forgotten by everyone except the Titanis who could not let go. But something began to change in Selene. The epiphany that had come to her during that night of weeping had planted a seed, and seeds, once planted, inevitably grow. She began to understand that there was a difference between eternal love and eternal obsession. Love required freedom, the freedom to choose, the freedom to change, the freedom to leave. What she had with Endymion had none of these things. He had no choice. He could not change. He could not leave. And neither, she realized, could she. They were both trapped in a prison of their own making, and the key had been lost 3,000 years ago. One night, Selene did not go to the cave. She drove her chariot over Mount Latmos as always, but she did not descend. She looked down at the mountain, at the darkness where the cave lay hidden, and she continued westward without stopping. It was the hardest thing she had done in millennia. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to complete her ritual, to sit beside Endymion as she had done for 3,000 years. But she forced herself to continue forward. Just for one night, she would break the pattern. Just for one night, she would see if the world would end if she failed to keep her vigil. The night passed. Dawn came. Eos took over the sky. And Endymion, unvisited for the first time in 3,000 years, slept on in his cave, unaware of the change. Selene felt simultaneously guilty and relieved. She had abandoned him. Yet she also felt lighter than she had in centuries. As if by breaking the pattern for just one night, she had proven to herself that the pattern could be broken. The next night, she visited the cave again. But something had shifted. She sat beside Endymion and spoke to him as always, but the words felt different. Less like a ritual, more like a genuine conversation, even if it was still one-sided. "I did not come last night," she told him, "and the world did not end. You continued sleeping, as you always have. I think I am beginning to understand that you do not need me. You have not needed me for a very long time. This vigil has been for my benefit, not yours." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I'm going to start coming less often. Not because I love you less, but because I need to learn how to exist beyond this cave. I need to discover who I am when I am not defined by my devotion to a sleeping shepherd." It felt like betrayal to say these words aloud, but it also felt like the beginning of honesty. Over the following decades, Selene's visits became less frequent. Once every night became once a week, then once a month, then once a season. Each time she broke her routine, she expected to feel overwhelming guilt, but instead she felt a gradual sense of liberation. She began to pay attention to the world in ways she had neglected for millennia. She watched mortals with genuine curiosity rather than distant disinterest. She saw their struggles and their triumphs, their brief lives packed with meaning and purpose. She began to understand what Endymion had given up when he chose eternal sleep. Not just years, but the very experience of living. One night, while driving her chariot over a large modern city, she saw a couple sitting on a rooftop, looking up at her moon. They were old, their hair white, their faces lined with wrinkles. But they held hands, and they smiled at each other with a familiarity that spoke of decades shared together. They had grown old together. They had experienced joy and pain, conflict and reconciliation, change and growth. They had everything Selene and Endymion did not have. And they were mortal, fragile, temporary, but real. Selene felt tears forming again. But these were different from the tears she had shed in the cave. These were tears of understanding, of acceptance, of a wisdom that had taken 3,000 years to achieve. She understood now that Endymion's choice had not been a gift. It had been a tragedy, not because he would sleep forever, but because he had chosen to stop living in the mistaken belief that he was preserving love. He had confused stasis with eternity, preservation with devotion. And she had enabled his mistake, had even encouraged it, because she too had been afraid of loss. But loss was part of love. Loss was what gave love its meaning and weight. Without the possibility of ending, there could be no true beginning. The next time Selene visited the cave, she came with a question for Hypnos. She had sent word through the old channels that the gods still maintained, and he had agreed to meet her there. He arrived at sunset, his dark wings folding as he stepped into the cave's entrance. Endymion lay between them, unchanged, eternal, a monument to a choice made long ago by two beings who had not understood what they were doing. "You want me to wake him?" Hypnos said. It was not a question. "Yes," Selene replied. "I understand the risks. I understand that he will be disoriented, lost in time, confused, and perhaps angry. But I think we owe him the choice to continue living, even if that life is difficult." Hypnos studied her for a long moment. "What changed your mind?" "Everything," she said simply, "and nothing. I have had 3,000 years to think about this, Hypnos. 3,000 years to sit in this cave and watch him sleep. And I finally understand that I have been selfish. I kept him sleeping not for his benefit, but for mine. So I would never have to face the pain of losing him. So I could preserve my memory of him forever. And now I think that memory is not enough. I think he deserves the chance to make his own choices, to live whatever life remains to him, however strange and difficult it might be. I think preserving him like a butterfly pinned to a board is not love. It is cowardice." Hypnos was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "If I wake him, there is no guarantee that he will thank you. He might be angry. He might blame you for these lost millennia. He might wish to return to sleep immediately." "I know," Selene said, "but that should be his choice to make, not mine." The god of sleep nodded slowly. "Very well. Step back." Selene moved away, her heart pounding with something that felt almost like mortal fear. After 3,000 years, she was about to hear Endymion's voice again. She was about to look into his eyes and see awareness there instead of the blank piece of sleep. She was terrified. Hypnos knelt beside Endymion and placed his hand on the shepherd's forehead, just as he had 3,000 years ago when he granted eternal sleep. But this time, instead of pushing consciousness down into darkness, he was calling it back up toward light. "Endymion," he said softly, "it is time to wake. Your sleep has ended. Come back to the world of light and sound and sensation. Open your eyes." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Endymion's breathing changed, becoming less regular, more varied. His fingers twitched, his eyelids fluttered, and then, slowly, impossibly, his eyes opened. The first thing Endymion saw was darkness. The cave was lit only by Selene's gentle silver glow, and his eyes, and used a sight for 3 millennia, struggled to focus. He blinked, confused, disoriented. Where was he? What was happening? He tried to sit up and found his body would not immediately obey. His muscles had not atrophied. Hypnos's magic had prevented that, but they had also not been used in so long that movement felt strange, disconnected. He managed to push himself up on one elbow, his vision slowly clearing. 2 figures stood in the cave. One was a man with dark wings, his presence radiating power and depth. The other was a woman dressed in light, her face beautiful and sad and strangely familiar. "Where?" Endymion's voice was rough and used. He swallowed and tried again. "Where am I?" "You are in the cave on Mount Latmos," Selene said softly, stepping forward. "The place where you fell asleep. Do you remember?" Fragments of memory began to surface. A dream garden, a choice, a goddess who loved him. "How long?" he asked, already afraid of the answer. Selene and Hypnos exchanged glances. Finally, she spoke. 3,000 years. Endymion stared at her, his mind unable to process the words. 3,000 years. An impossible span of time. A gulf so vast he could not even begin to comprehend it. "Everyone I knew," he whispered. "My family, my friends, the village, everyone, gone," Selene confirmed gently. "Long gone, I'm afraid. The world has changed beyond recognition. Nothing remains of the life you knew." Endymion felt something breaking inside him. He had thought he was choosing eternal rest to preserve himself for this goddess he loved. Instead, he had chosen to outlive everything, everyone, every certainty his young heart had held. He was an orphan in time, displaced and alone. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you wake me? Why not let me sleep forever?" "Because," Selene said, kneeling beside him, "I finally realized that sleep is not life, and preservation is not love. I kept you sleeping for 3,000 years because I was afraid of losing you. But in trying to keep you, I lost you anyway. You have been gone, Endymion. Gone from yourself, from the world, from everything that makes existence meaningful." Tears were streaming down her face now, silver trails in the darkness. "I am so sorry. I am sorry for accepting your choice. I am sorry for visiting you all these years, speaking to you as if you could hear, pretending we had something real. I am sorry for being selfish and afraid. You deserve better. You deserve to live." Endymion looked at her, this goddess who had loved him enough to imprison him and now loved him enough to free him. He did not know what to feel. Anger? Gratitude? Grief? All of it swirled together in a confused mass of emotion. "What do I do now?" he asked helplessly. "How do I live in a world I don't understand?" "One day at a time," Hypnos said gently, "as all mortals do." "Yes," You are displaced in time. Yes, you have lost everything you once knew, but you still have yourself. You still have consciousness, well, the ability to make choices. That is more than you had yesterday. Can I choose to sleep again? Endymion asked. Can I return to the peace I had? He saw pain flash across Celine's face, but to her credit, she did not try to influence his answer. She simply waited, letting him make his own choice, as she should have done 3,000 years ago. Hypnos nodded. If that is truly what you want, I will grant it. But consider carefully, Endymion. Sleep is seductive. It offers escape from pain and confusion, but it also offers escape from everything else, from growth, from discovery, from the possibility of joy. If you sleep again, you will never know what you might have become. Endymion closed his eyes, trying to think through the chaos of his emotions. Part of him desperately wanted to return to sleep, to escape this impossible situation. But another part, a part he had not known existed, was curious. What was this new world like? What wonders and horrors had 3,000 years brought? Who might he become if he chose to live in this strange future? When he opened his eyes again, he looked at Celine. If I choose to stay awake, will you help me? Will you teach me about this new world? Yes, she said immediately, if you will let me. Not as a goddess hovering over you, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as someone who wants to see you truly live. Then I will stay awake, Endymion said. I will try to live. I don't know if I will succeed. I don't know if I will regret this choice. But I need to try. For my own sake, I need to try. Celine felt relief flooding through her, so intense it was almost painful. He had chosen life, against all odds. Despite all the reasons he had to refuse, he had chosen to continue. Hypnos smiled, a rare expression on his usually solemn face. Then my work here is done. Endymion, you have courage. Celine, you have wisdom. Perhaps, in time, you will both find peace. He spread his wings and departed, leaving them alone in the cave. The weeks that followed were difficult beyond measure. Endymion had to learn to walk properly again, to move his body with confidence and grace. He had to adjust to the sensory overload of the waking world after 3,000 years of nothing. Every sound was too loud, every light too bright, every sensation overwhelming. Celine stayed with him through it all. She did not return to her chariot in the sky. For the first time in her existence, she asked her sister Eos to take over her duties, to drive both the moon and the sun until Celine could return. Eos agreed, understanding somehow that this was important, that Celine needed this time. Together, they explored the cave and the mountain around it. Endymion relearned the feel of earth beneath his feet, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the taste of food and water. Simple things that mortals took for granted felt like miracles to him after so long without them. Slowly, carefully, Celine began to introduce him to the modern world. They started with the mountain itself, which had changed but was still recognizable. Then they ventured down to the valleys, where small towns had grown. She explained automobiles and electricity, computers, and airplanes. Each new concept was a shock, but Endymion proved adaptable. Perhaps because he had already experienced the greatest shock possible, waking 3,000 years out of time. Everything else seemed manageable by comparison. They talked for hours every day. Real conversations, the kind they had never had before. Endymion told her about his life before the sleep, about his childhood and his dreams, his fears and hopes. Selene told him about the millennia, about watching civilizations rise and fall, about the loneliness of immortality and the burden of eternal memory. "Why did you really choose sleep?" she asked him one evening as they sat on a mountainside, watching the sunset. "Was it truly for me, or was it for yourself?" Endymion thought carefully before answering. "I think it was both," he said finally. "I did love you. I wanted to give you something that would last. But I also think I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of really living. Of facing challenges and making mistakes and growing old. Sleep seemed easier, cleaner. I would be preserved perfectly, never having to confront my own flaws or limitations. I think part of me wanted to escape the difficulty of being human." Selene nodded slowly. "I understand that more than you know. Why do you think I kept you sleeping for so long?" "I was afraid too. Afraid of loss. Afraid of change. Afraid of discovering that what I felt for you might not survive the reality of truly knowing you." "And now?" Endymion asked. "Now that you do know me?" She smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "Now I think I am beginning to actually love you. Not the idea of you, not the preserved memory, but the real, flawed, confused person sitting beside me. And it is more complicated than I thought it would be, but also more real." They sat in silence for a while, watching the colors change in the sky. Finally, Endymion spoke again. "I don't know if I can return your love. Not yet. I am still trying to figure out who I am in this new world. But I'm grateful you woke me. However hard this is, it is better than sleeping. I know that now." "That is enough," Selene said softly. "More than enough." Months turned into years. Endymion gradually adjusted to the 21st century. He learned to read modern languages, to use technology, to navigate the complex social structures of contemporary society. Selene helped him establish an identity, giving him access to resources that would allow him to build a new life. He did not become a god, despite Selene's offer to petition Zeus for his immortality. He chose instead to remain mortal, to experience life with all its limitations and pain. He had been given a second chance at living, and he wanted to live it fully, including accepting the inevitable end that came to all mortals. "I will grow old this time," he told Selene. "I will age and weaken and eventually die. Can you accept that?" "I will have to," she replied, "because the alternative, keeping you frozen again, is not acceptable. I would rather have you for whatever years remain to you, watching you change and grow, than have a statue to worship forever. And when I die," she was quiet for a long moment, "I will grieve. I will carry that grief for the rest of my immortal existence. But I will also carry the memory of truly knowing you, and that will make the pain worthwhile." Their relationship evolved in ways neither had expected. It was not the grand romance of myths and legends. It was something more complicated and more real, a friendship, a partnership, a love that had been tested by time and mistake and was now being rebuilt on more honest foundations. Endymion eventually moved away from Mount Latmos, finding a small apartment in a nearby city. He got a job, made friends, experienced the ordinary pleasures and frustrations of modern life. Selene visited regularly, but no longer constantly. They had learned the value of space, of independence, of lives that could exist separately even as they chose to intertwine. Sometimes Endymion would lie awake at night, thinking about the 3,000 years he had lost. Those thoughts brought grief and regret, but they also brought gratitude. He had been given something rare, a chance to correct a mistake, to choose life after choosing sleep. How many mortals got that opportunity? 20 years passed. Endymion was in his early 40s now, his face showing the first lines of age, his hair beginning to gray at the temples. Selene loved every new wrinkle, every sign that he was truly living this time. One evening, they returned together to the cave on Mount Latmos. They had not been back since he had awakened, but something drew them there, perhaps a need for closure, or perhaps simply the pull of memory. The cave looked smaller than Endymion remembered. The bed where he had slept for 3,000 years was still there, though worn and weathered now. The space felt different without the weight of enchantment hanging over it. "Do you regret it?" Selene asked, choosing sleep originally, or waking? Endymion considered the question carefully. "I regret the lost time," he said finally. "I regret the people I never met, the experiences I missed, the 3,000 years of world history that passed without me. But I don't regret the journey. Both the sleeping and the waking were part of my path. They made me who I am now." He turned to face her fully. "And you? Do you regret keeping me sleeping so long?" "Every day," she admitted. "But I also understand why I did it. I was afraid and selfish and foolish. But I was also acting from a genuine desire to preserve something beautiful. My methods were wrong, but my intentions were not entirely without merit." "We were both so young," Endymion said, smiling slightly. "Even you, despite being immortal. We did not understand what we were doing." "No," Selene agreed. "We did not. But perhaps that is the nature of love. We stumble into it blindly, make terrible mistakes, and hope we learn enough to do better next time." They stood together in the cave for a long time, letting the weight of memory settle around them. Then, by unspoken agreement, they left. They closed up the entrance carefully, sealing it against time and weather. The cave would remain, a monument to a mistake and its eventual correction, but they would not return. Their story was no longer in that cave. It was in the world outside, in the present, in the life they were choosing to build together one day at a time. More years passed. Endymion grew older, his body gradually showing the signs of mortality that he had once tried to escape. He experienced aches and pains, the slowing of reflexes, the way memory became less sharp. But he also experienced the deepening of wisdom, the satisfaction of work well done, the joy of friendships built over years of shared experience. Selene remained unchanged, eternal and beautiful. Sometimes mortals who did not know their story would ask if she was his daughter, and they would laugh at the irony. She continued her duties, driving her moon chariot across the sky each night, but she had learned to balance her divine responsibilities with her love for a mortal man. They never married. Marriage seemed too small a container for what they had. They were something beyond conventional labels. Two beings from different worlds who had found a way to build something real despite all the reasons they should not have been able to. On Endymion's 60th birthday, they sat together on a hillside, watching the moon rise. His hair was completely gray now, his face deeply lined. He moved more slowly, his joints stiff with arthritis, but his eyes were bright with life with consciousness, with the awareness that each moment was precious precisely because it would not last forever. "I am getting old," he said, stating the obvious. "Yes," Celine agreed. "You are. Does it bother you? Watching me age?" She considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, when I see you struggle with tasks that used to be easy, when I know that your time is growing shorter. But it also fills me with a strange pride. You're doing what mortals do. You're living fully, accepting the consequences of existence. That takes courage I'm not sure I possess." "You woke me," Endymion pointed out. "That took courage too." "Perhaps," she said. "Or perhaps it was simply the least I owed you after 3,000 years." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Finally, Endymion spoke again. "When I die, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Do not try to preserve me again. Do not ask Hypnos for another enchantment. Let me go completely this time. Let me become memory and dust, the way all mortals should." Celine felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I promise. I will not trap you again. I will let you go, truly and completely. But I will also remember you, Endymion. I will carry your memory through eternity, and that will be enough." He reached over and took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for waking me, for giving me these years, for learning how to love something you could not keep forever. Thank you for teaching me what love actually means," she replied, "for showing me that loss is part of the equation, not something to be feared and avoided." Endymion lived another 15 years. He died peacefully at the age of 75, in his sleep in the small house he had made his home. Celine was with him at the end, holding his hand, whispering words of love and comfort as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. She kept her promise. She did not try to preserve him or bring him back. She let the mortals who loved him handle his funeral, watched as they cremated his body and scattered his ashes on Mount Latmos, returning him to the place where his story had begun. The grief was immense, a vast ocean of pain that threatened to drown her. But it was also clean, honest, real. This was what loss felt like when you allowed it to happen naturally, when you did not try to cheat or escape it. It hurt more than she thought possible, but it also felt right in a way that 3,000 years of preserved sleep had never felt. She mourned him properly. She did not lock herself in a cave or pretend he was still somehow present. She allowed herself to feel the loss fully, to cry until she had no tears left, to rage against the unfairness of mortality, even as she accepted its inevitability. And slowly, over the years that followed, the sharp pain of loss softened into something gentler. Memory, gratitude, a bittersweet acknowledgement of something that had been real and precious and finite. She continued her duties, driving the moon across the sky each night. But now when she passed over Mount Latmos, she did not feel the pull to descend. She simply looked down at the mountain where Endymion's ashes had been scattered, where the cave of eternal sleep remained sealed and empty, and she smiled. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, knowing he could not hear her, knowing he was truly gone. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to love something temporary. Thank you for showing me that endings are not failures but completions. Thank you for giving me the gift of your real life rather than your preserved sleep." The mountain did not answer, but somewhere in the patterns of starlight and moonlight, in the gentle cycles of night and day, in the way all things eventually return to dust, there was a kind of response, an acknowledgement that some lessons can only be learned through loss, that some love can only be proven through letting go. Millennia later, when the world had changed again beyond recognition, when the old gods had faded almost entirely from memory, when even Greece itself had been reshaped by time and history, occasional travelers would still find their way to Mount Latmos. They came for hiking, for adventure, for the beautiful views. Most knew nothing of the mountain's history, of the shepherd who had slept there for 3,000 years, of the Titaness who had loved him enough to imprison him, and then loved him enough to free him. But sometimes, on nights when the moon was full and bright, when the silver light fell across the rocky slopes with particular beauty, people would report a strange feeling, a sense of presence, of ancient stories still lingering in the air. Some claimed to hear whispers on the wind, fragments of conversations from long ago. The scholars who studied mythology would write about Endymion and Selene, debating the meaning of the myth. Was it a cautionary tale about the dangers of immortality? A romantic tragedy? A story about the power of love to transcend death? They did not know that the story had a second half, a correction to the tragedy. They did not know about the waking, the years of real life that followed, the millennia of sleep. Those details have been lost to time, known only to the few immortals who remained and chose to remember. But perhaps that was fitting. The real story, the one about learning to love something temporary, about finding courage to let go, about choosing difficult reality over comfortable illusion. That story was not meant for myths and legends. It was too quiet, too personal, too real for that. It was a story that could only be understood by those who had loved and lost, who had made terrible mistakes and found the strength to correct them, who had learned that the most profound acts of love sometimes look like releasing rather than holding on. And so the cave on Mount Latmos remained empty and sealed, a forgotten monument to a love that had been tested by time, broken by selfishness, and eventually redeemed through letting go. The moon continued its journey across the sky, as it always had, as it always would. But now, when Selene looked down at the sleeping world, she understood something she had not known during those 3,000 years of vigil. Love was not about preservation. It was not about freezing moments in time or preventing loss through supernatural means. Love was about being present for whatever time you were given, about choosing to know someone despite the certainty of ending, about accepting that all beautiful things were temporary and loving them anyway. Endymion had given her that gift through his sleep and his waking, through his mortality and his willingness to truly live despite knowing how it would end. He had taught her what immortals rarely learned. That meaning came not from duration, but from depth, not from preservation, but from presence. She carried that lesson with her through eternity, a treasure more valuable than any magical sleep or divine power. And though she mourned him, though there were nights when the grief washed over her anew, she never regretted waking him. She never wished she could return to those 3,000 years of comfortable delusion, because she had known him, really known him, and that was worth all the pain that came with loss. The story of Hypnos and Endymion's eternal sleep has been told many ways over the centuries. But perhaps the truest version is not the one carved in marble or written in ancient scrolls. Perhaps it is the one written in starlight and memory, in the lessons learned through terrible mistakes and eventual redemption. It is the story of two beings who thought they knew what love was and discovered they were wrong. It is the story of a choice made in innocence and corrected in wisdom. It is the story of learning that some prisons are made of protection and some freedom is found in letting go. And it is the story of a shepherd who slept for 3,000 years and then woke to discover that life, however difficult and brief, was infinitely more valuable than eternal preservation. That story continues even now, whispered by the wind on Mount Latmos, reflected in the light of the full moon, remembered by those who understand that the greatest love stories are not the ones that never end, but the ones that teach us how to survive endings with grace and gratitude. Sleep well, Endymion. Your rest has ended, but your story endures, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the possibility of correction, of growth, of learning to love better the second time around. And may all who hear this story carry its lesson forward. That love is not possession, that preservation is not devotion, and that the greatest gift we can give those we love is the freedom to truly live, even if that means accepting the inevitability of goodbye. The moon rises, the night continues, and somewhere in the space between waking and dreaming, a shepherd who was lost to time and then found again reminds us that it is never too late to wake up, to choose life, to learn what love really means. The history of Mount Latmos itself deserves telling, for it was not just any mountain. Long before Endymion ever climbed its slopes, long before even the current age of gods had fully established their reign, this mountain had been a place of power. The ancient Titans had walked here in the age before Zeus overthrew his father. The rocks themselves remembered those primordial times, holding memories in their stone that no mortal could access, but that gods could sense like whispers from a distant age. The mountain rose from the Aegean coast, its peaks sometimes visible from ships sailing the wine-dark sea. Its slopes were covered in forests of oak and pine in the higher elevations, giving way to olive groves and scrubland in the lower reaches. Springs bubbled from hidden sources, creating small streams that sang their way down rocky channels toward the valleys below. Wild herbs grew in abundance: thyme and oregano, sage and rosemary, filling the air with their fragrance, especially in the heat of midday when the sun drew out their essential oils. Caves dotted the mountainside, carved by water and time into the soft limestone. Some were shallow indentations barely deep enough to shelter a traveler from rain. Others extended deep into the mountain's heart, opening into chambers that had never seen sunlight, where strange formations of rock created shapes that seemed almost deliberately crafted: columns and curtains, frozen waterfalls of stone, sculptures that might have been gods or might have been merely the patient work of dripping water over uncounted centuries. It was in one of these deeper caves that Endymion had made his home. He had discovered it quite by accident, really, while searching for a lost lamb that had wandered from his flock. The lamb had been huddled in the cave's entrance, frightened by something, perhaps a fox, perhaps just the gathering darkness of evening. Endymion had carried the lamb back to the flock, but the next day he had returned to the cave alone, drawn by curiosity and something else, something he could not quite name. The cave had felt right somehow. The main chamber was large enough to stand in comfortably, with a high ceiling that made the space feel open rather than confining. The floor was relatively smooth, covered in a fine dust that suggested no animals currently made the space their den. And the entrance faced east, which meant morning light would stream in, warming the space, while the thick rock walls would keep it cool during the heat of the day. He had moved in gradually, bringing first a simple bedroll and a few cooking implements, then his small collection of personal belongings, a few changes of clothing, a knife that had been his father's, a small wooden flute he had carved himself but rarely played. Within a week, he had relocated his entire life to the cave, leaving behind the small house in the village he had shared with his elderly uncle after his parents died. The villagers had thought him strange for the choice. Why would a young man, blessed with beauty and health, choose to live alone on a mountain like a hermit? There were whispers that perhaps he was touched by the gods, not necessarily in a good way. Perhaps he had offended some deity and was doing penance. Perhaps he was mad. Perhaps he was running from some scandal or crime. But the truth was simpler and more complex than any of their theories. Endymion had simply grown weary of being looked at. From childhood, people had commented on his appearance. His mother had been beautiful, his father handsome, and their son had inherited and somehow surpassed both. As a child, strangers would stop his mother in the marketplace just to look at him, to comment on his perfect features, his large dark eyes, the way his hair caught the light. As he grew older, the attention had intensified and changed in nature. Young women giggled and whispered when he passed. Older women made suggestions to his uncle about advantageous marriages. Men regarded him with either envy or suspicion, as if his beauty was somehow a threat or an insult to their own worth. He had never asked for any of it. He did not enjoy being admired for something he had no control over, something that said nothing about who he actually was as a person. When people looked at him, they saw only his face, his form. They did not see his thoughts, his fears, his dreams. They did not care about the things that interested him, the way dawn light changed the color of the sea, the patterned stars made in the sky, the quiet satisfaction of work done well. They only wanted to look at him, to possess him with their eyes, to claim they had seen the most beautiful young man in all of Greece. So he had retreated. Here on the mountain, with only his sheep for company, he could simply be himself. The sheep did not care what he looked like. They cared only that he led them to good grazing, protected them from predators, ensured they had access to water. It was a simple exchange, honest and uncomplicated. He provided care. They provided wool and milk and meat. No one stared at him with that peculiar intensity he had come to dread. No one whispered about him when they thought he could not hear. In the evenings, after the sheep were settled for the night, he would lie at the cave's entrance and watch the sky. He had always been fascinated by the stars and the moon. Unlike people, the heavens did not judge him. They simply existed, following their eternal patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal life. He found comfort in that indifference, in the reminder that the universe was vast and he was small, and his problems with unwanted attention were minuscule in the grand scheme of things. But what he did not know, what he could not have known, was that the moon was not indifferent at all, that for months now, immortal eyes had been watching him with the very same intensity he had fled the village to escape, that even here, In his mountain sanctuary, he was being observed, studied, desired. The irony would have struck him as cruel if he had known. But he did not know. Not yet. In the realm of the gods, time moved differently. A mortal month might pass in what felt like an afternoon to an immortal. Conversations that lasted hours by mortal reckoning felt like mere moments to beings who had existed since before humans learned to count. This difference in temporal perception was one of the many barriers that made relationships between mortals and immortals so complicated, so fraught with potential misunderstanding. Selene had first noticed Endymion on what mortals would call a random night. Though gods know there is no such thing as true randomness, only patterns too complex for limited minds to perceive. She had been making her usual journey across the sky, her chariot pulled by horses whose names, bright and brilliant, reflected their luminous nature. The night had been clear, the air crisp with the approach of autumn, and she had been thinking about nothing in particular, simply performing her duty as she had done for eons beyond counting. Then her gaze had fallen upon Mount Latmos, and she had seen him, a young man, sitting alone at the entrance to a cave, his face turned upward toward her light. In that moment, something had shifted inside her, something she had never experienced in all her immortal existence. Mortals might have called it love at first sight, though gods know that such instant connections are rarely so simple. What she felt was more like recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment without knowing it, as if this mortal she had never met was somehow the answer to a question she had not known she was asking. She had slowed her chariot, letting her horses drift lower, desperate for a better view. The young man's beauty was evident even from her great height. The classical perfection of his features, the grace of his posture, the way moonlight seemed to love him, caressing his face with gentle silver. But it was not just his appearance that had caught her attention. It was something else, something in the way he looked at the sky. There was a quality of wonder in his gaze, an openness, a receptivity. He was not just looking at the moon. He was seeing it, appreciating it, connecting with it in a way that suggested depth of character beyond mere physical beauty. She had continued her journey eventually, but reluctantly, her attention drawn back to the mountain again and again. Who was he? What was his name? What had brought him to live alone on that mountainside? The questions consumed her, burning in her mind like stars whose light grew brighter instead of dimming with time. The next night she returned, and the night after that, and the night after that. Each time, she found him there, sometimes sitting at the cave entrance, sometimes lying on his back with his arms folded behind his head, sometimes walking among his flock, checking on them before settling down for the night. She began to learn his patterns, his habits. She noticed that he often played a small wooden flute in the evenings, simple melodies that drifted up to her on the night air. She observed that he was gentle with his animals, patient and caring. She saw that he sometimes spoke aloud, talking to his sheep or perhaps to himself, though she was too far away to hear his words. Night by night, her fascination grew into something more. It was not just attraction, though that was certainly part of it. It was a deep longing to know him, to understand him, to be part of his world. She found herself thinking about him during the day, when she rested in her celestial chambers waiting for evening to come. She wondered what he was doing, what he was thinking. She imagined conversations they might have, experiences they might share. But there was a fundamental problem, one that grew more pressing with each passing night. She was immortal, and he was not. Even if she descended from her chariot and introduced herself, even if by some miracle he welcomed her attention rather than fleeing in terror from a goddess, what future could they possibly have? He would age, grow old, die, all in what would feel like the blink of an eye to her. She would watch him wither and fade, and then she would be left alone with her grief, carrying it through eternity like a wound that could never heal. The unfairness of it consumed her. Why should mortality and immortality be such insurmountable barriers? Why should love be constrained by the limits of flesh and time? She was a Titaness, one of the ancient powers that had existed before Zeus and his siblings overthrew their father Kronos. Surely there must be some way, some solution that would allow her to love this mortal without being doomed to lose him. It was this desperate yearning that had led her to Hypnos. The god of sleep dwelt in a realm few immortals visited willingly, a twilight place between life and death, where boundaries grew uncertain and anything seemed possible. If anyone could offer a solution to her dilemma, it would be him. The entrance to Hypnos' realm was not a place you could simply walk to. It existed at the edge of the underworld, in a borderland where the living world and the realm of the dead pressed against each other like two soap bubbles sharing a common wall. To reach it, Selene had to descend from the sky, leaving her chariot and horses behind, and make her way through a series of caves that led deeper and deeper into the earth. The journey took her through strange landscapes. The first cave was ordinary enough, cool and dark, but recognizable as part of the mortal world. But as she went deeper, things began to change. The rock walls started to shimmer with colors that had no names, hues that mortal eyes could not perceive. The air grew thick with a sweetness that was almost narcotic, the scent of poppies so concentrated it made even a goddess feel drowsy. Time itself seemed to slow and blur, moments stretching like honey, making it hard to remember how long she had been walking or how far she had come. She passed through a chamber where the walls were covered in carvings, images of sleeping figures, of dreams made manifest, of the borderland between consciousness and void. Some of the carvings were ancient beyond measure, created by hands that had turned to dust long before Zeus was born. Others seemed recent, or perhaps they were constantly being remade, shifting and changing like dreams themselves, never quite the same from one moment to the next. Finally, she reached the inner sanctuary, a vast cave whose ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into darkness, whose floor was covered in a carpet of poppies growing impossibly in the absence of sunlight. In the center of the cave, a river flowed, the Lethe River of Forgetfulness, whose waters could erase memory, identity, the very sense of self. It flowed silently, without the gurgle and splash of ordinary water, more like liquid darkness than actual liquid. And beside the river, in a grove of poppies that grew thicker and taller than anywhere else, she found Hypnos. He appeared as a young man, beautiful in a way that was different from Endymion's beauty. Where the shepherd's appearance was warm and inviting, Hypnos had a quality of coolness, of distance. His hair was dark as night without stars, his skin pale as milk, his eyes deep and mysterious as wells that had no bottom. Great wings grew from his back, Not the feathered wings of birds, but something more like the wings of moths or butterflies, dark and velvety, covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them too long. He did not seem surprised by her arrival. Perhaps in his realm, surprise was not possible. Perhaps he perceived time differently than other gods, seeing past and future as one continuous present. Or perhaps he had simply been expecting her, knowing that sooner or later, an immortal in love with a mortal would come seeking his aid. Selene, he greeted her, his voice soft as falling snow. Welcome to my home. You have come to ask about the shepherd, haven't you? The one who looks at the moon each night as if seeking something he cannot name. How did you know? She asked, though the answer seemed obvious. Hypnos knew all sleeping minds, visited all dreams. Perhaps he had already been present in Endymion's sleep, had already seen the young man's thoughts and feelings. I know many things, Hypnos replied, neither confirming nor denying her theory. But more importantly, I know why you have come. You want me to grant him eternal sleep, to preserve him forever so you never have to watch him age and die. Can you do it? She asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. Of course I can, he said simply. Sleep is my domain, my power. I can touch a mortal and send them into slumber from which they will never wake, their bodies preserved in the moment I touch them, unchanging for all eternity. But Selene, you must understand what you are asking. It is not immortality. It is suspension. He will not be truly alive, but neither will he be dead. He will exist in a state between aware or unaware, depending on the depth of the sleep I grant him. Is this truly what you want for him? He will not age, she said, as if trying to convince herself as much as him. He will not sicken or suffer or die. He will remain perfect forever. Perfect and frozen, Hypnos agreed. Beautiful and unreachable. You will be able to look at him, to sit beside him, to speak to him if you wish. But he will never answer. He will never truly know you. Is that love, Selene? Or is it something else? His question struck at the heart of her doubts, the fear she had been trying to suppress. What else can I do? She whispered. If I let him live naturally, he will die, and I will lose him completely. At least this way, I will have him in some form. Isn't some form better than nothing? Hypnos was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those fathomless eyes. Then he spoke again, and his words would change everything. There's another option, he said, one I rarely offer, but for you, Selene, I will make this exception. I could give him a choice. And that was how it had all begun. The offer of choice, the dream visitation, the terrible decision that Endymion would have to make. As Selene left Hypnos's realm that day, climbing back up through the strange caves toward the light and air of the living world, she had felt both relief and trepidation. She had found a solution, yes, but it was not the simple solution she had hoped for. It required trust that Endymion would choose wisely, trust that whatever he chose would be something she could live with. Now, months later, the moment had finally arrived. Tonight, Hypnos would visit Endymion in his dreams. Tonight, the shepherd would be given his impossible choice. And tomorrow, Selene would discover whether her love would lead to preservation or to real life, to eternal stillness or to 50 years of genuine connection. The moon rose higher in the sky. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And on Mount Latmos, in a cave where moonlight pooled like liquid silver, A young shepherd slept peacefully, unaware that his dreams were about to carry the weight of destiny. But before we return to that fateful night, there is more that needs to be understood about the players in this drama. For Hypnos was not just the god of sleep. He was also a being with his own history, his own motivations, his own complicated relationship with the concept of choice and consent. He had been born, as many of the gods were, from more primal forces. His mother was Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, one of the first beings to emerge from the initial chaos of creation. His father was Erebus, the personification of darkness. From such parentage, it was perhaps inevitable that Hypnos would be associated with rest, with the darkness that comes when consciousness fades, with the borderland between being and non-being. His twin brother was Thanatos, death personified. The two were often depicted together, two sides of the same coin: sleep and death, temporary rest and permanent cessation. But where Thanatos was cold and final, Hypnos was gentle and temporary. People feared Thanatos, but welcomed Hypnos. Every night, mortals surrendered to his embrace willingly, trusting that he would release them come morning. It was a sacred trust, one that Hypnos took seriously. He had witnessed the full sweep of human history from his twilight realm. He had been present at every birth, touching newborns with gentle hands to grant them their first true rest. He had been present at every deathbed, offering comfort in those final moments when consciousness began to fade. He had walked through every war, every plague, every disaster, granting temporary escape to those who suffered, allowing their minds respite even when their bodies found none. And through all of that, he had developed a profound respect for mortal choice. Unlike many gods who saw mortals as playthings or pawns, Hypnos understood that the brevity of mortal life gave it a weight, a significance that a mortal existence often lacked. Mortals made choices knowing they would not have infinite time to correct mistakes. That knowledge informed every decision they made, gave every moment a precious quality that gods often failed to appreciate. So when Selene had come to him asking for eternal sleep for her beloved, his first instinct had been to refuse. He had granted such sleep before, usually as a curse, occasionally as a mercy. But always it had troubled him. To remove choice, to suspend consciousness indefinitely, it felt like a violation of something fundamental, even when the person being affected was unaware of what they were losing. But Selene's love had been so evident, so genuine, that he had found himself wanting to help her. And that was when he had conceived of the idea of giving Endymion a choice. Let the mortal decide his own fate. Let him weigh the options and choose based on his own understanding of what he wanted from existence. That way, if tragedy resulted, at least it would be tragedy of the mortal's own making rather than something imposed by divine whim. Of course, the choice itself was constructed in a particular way. Hypnos had framed it as a decision between two extreme options: 50 years of waking life followed by death, or eternal sleep beginning immediately. He had not offered other possibilities, other solutions that might have existed. He had not, for instance, suggested that Endymion might be granted immortality, elevated to godhood, allowed to join Selene as an equal. Was that manipulation? Perhaps. But Hypnos had his reasons. He He had seen what happened when mortals were made immortal. Sometimes it worked out well, but often it did not. Immortality changed people in ways that were hard to predict. The mortal mindset, so beautifully adapted to a finite existence, often struggled when confronted with eternity. People became bored or bitter or lost their sense of purpose. They began to understand why so many gods were petty and cruel. When consequences lost their weight, when nothing truly mattered because there was always more time to fix mistakes, morality itself became negotiable. Better, Hypnos had decided to offer the choices he did. Either Endymion could have a full but brief mortal life with Selene, experiencing real connection before inevitable separation, or he could accept eternal sleep, sacrificing awareness for the sake of preservation. Both options had clear costs and clear benefits. Both required sacrifice. Both were, in their own way, acts of love. But was it fair? That question would haunt everyone involved for millennia to come. As Endymion slept that night, unaware of the divine drama unfolding around him, the mountain itself seemed to hold its breath. The ancient stones that had witnessed countless mortal lives flicker and fade, that had seen empires rise and crumble, that remembered the age of titans. Even they seemed to recognize that something significant was happening. If mountains could speak, if stone could whisper its accumulated wisdom, what would Mount Latmos have said to the sleeping shepherd? Perhaps it would have warned him. Perhaps it would have reminded him that the attention of gods was rarely a blessing without complications. Perhaps it would have told him about other mortals who had caught divine eyes. Ganymede stolen away to Olympus, Psyche tested by jealous gods, Prometheus punished for caring too much about human welfare. The history of god-mortal interaction was not a gentle one. Or perhaps the mountain would have encouraged him. Perhaps it would have spoken of the rarity of being truly seen and valued by something greater than yourself. Perhaps it would have reminded him that most mortals lived and died in obscurity, their lives unnoticed by powers beyond their immediate community. To be loved by a goddess, wasn't that an honor worth any price? But mountains do not speak, at least not in words that mortal ears can hear. And so Endymion slept on, his mind slowly sinking into the deeper levels of rest where dreams take on the quality of visitations, where the boundary between imagination and reality grows thin as gossamer. The dream came gradually. At first, it was fragmentary and confused, as most dreams are: images of his flock, memories of his childhood, the face of his mother who had died when he was 12. But then the fragments began to coalesce, taking on a structure and coherence that felt different from ordinary dreams. It was as if someone had stepped into the random chaos of his sleeping mind and imposed order, creating a narrative where before there had been only disconnected impressions. He found himself standing in a garden that he knew he had never visited, but that somehow felt familiar. The flowers bloomed in colors that had no names, colors he had never seen while awake, but that his dreaming mind accepted as natural. The sky above held both stars and sunlight, day and night existing simultaneously without conflict. And the air smelled of poppies, sweet and thick, making him feel drowsy even within the dream. Endymion, a voice called his name, and he turned to see a woman dressed in robes of silver light. Her face was more beautiful than any he had seen in waking life, yet also somehow familiar, as if he had been looking at her all his life without realizing it. "I am Celine. Do you know me?" In the strange logic of dreams, he found that he did know her, or at least knew of her. She was the moon, the silver light that had kept him company on so many lonely nights, the gentle presence he had felt but never named. "I know you," he confirmed. "But why are you here? Why are you speaking to me?" "Because I love you," she said simply, and the words seemed to resonate through the entire dream garden, making the flowers tremble and the light grow more intense. "I have watched you from my chariot in the sky. I have seen your kindness, your solitude, your nightly contemplation of the heavens. And I have fallen in love with the man I have observed." Endymion felt his heart respond to her words with a mixture of joy and confusion. To be loved was what he had fled from, and yet to be loved by someone who had bothered to see beyond his appearance, who had observed his character and habits rather than just his face. That was different. That was something he had always longed for, but never expected to find. "But you are a goddess," he said slowly, working through the implications. "And I am mortal. How can such love exist? What future could we possibly have?" "That," said another voice, "is precisely the question we have come to discuss." Endymion turned to see a second figure emerging from the shadows of the garden. This one appeared as a young man with dark wings and eyes that seemed to contain infinite depth, eyes you could fall into and never find your way back out. There was something simultaneously comforting and unsettling about his presence, as if he was both friend and stranger, both refuge and risk. "I am Hypnos," the winged figure said, "the god of sleep, and I have come to offer you a choice that will determine the rest of your existence." And then the choice was laid out before him, explained in that calm, patient voice that seemed to make even impossible decisions sound reasonable. 50 years of waking life with Celine, followed by death, or eternal sleep, preserving his youth and beauty forever, giving Celine something unchanging to visit and cherish. As Hypnos spoke, Endymion's mind raced, trying to process the implications of each option. If he chose the 50 years, he would have half a century with Celine, time to truly know her, to build something real between them. He would experience love, conversation, partnership, all the things that made life rich and meaningful. But it would end. In 50 years, he would be an old man, and she would still be eternally young. Would she still want him then? Would he want her to see him diminished and fading? And when death finally came, as it must, she would grieve. She would carry that grief forever, being immortal. Was it fair to inflict such pain on someone who had shown him nothing but love? Was it not kinder to spare her that suffering, even if it meant sacrificing his own waking experience? But if he chose eternal sleep, what would he really be giving up? Not just his future, that was obvious, but also his self. He would no longer be a conscious being making choices and experiencing the world. He would be, in essence, a beautiful object, a possession rather than a person. Even if Celine visited him every night, even if she spoke to him and touched him with all the love in her immortal heart, he would not truly be present for any of it. He would be gone, perhaps dreaming, perhaps floating in some liminal space of dim awareness, but fundamentally absent from his own existence. Which was the greater sacrifice? To live fully and inflict pain on his beloved through his inevitable death, or to die to himself, not physically, but in terms of consciousness and agency. in order to spare her that grief. The dream seemed to stretch on forever, giving him time to think, to feel, to wrestle with the impossible weight of the choice before him. And through it all, Celine stood watching him with an expression that held both hope and fear, love and sorrow. She had said she would not make the choice for him, that his life was his own, and he believed her. But he could also see in her eyes what she was hoping for, even if she would not say it aloud. She hoped he would choose life. She hoped he would choose the 50 years, even though she knew how much it would hurt when those years ended. Because she understood, perhaps better than he did in that moment, that love was not about preservation. It was about presence, about truly being with someone rather than merely possessing their image. But Endymion, young and inexperienced in matters of the heart, did not yet understand this. He saw her potential pain and wanted to spare her from it. He saw his own mortality as a curse he could convert into a gift through self-sacrifice. He believed, in his innocence, that loving someone meant protecting them from all harm, even if that protection came at the cost of genuine connection. And so, when morning came and he woke from his dream, he knew what his choice would be. He would choose eternal sleep. He would sacrifice his consciousness, his future, his very self, believing that this was the ultimate act of love. It would take 3,000 years for him to learn that he had been wrong. Sleep now, dear listener, with the understanding that sleep is a gift, not a prison. Rest with the knowledge that morning will come, bringing with it new choices, new chances, new opportunities to love and live and let go. The story has ended, but its truth remains. And in that truth, perhaps we can all find peace.